This is Kingdom Kommerce, and today's episode starts now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of Kingdom Kommerce. Today, we are interviewing a special guest. He has a background of creativity, innovation, leadership in branding, advertising, public relations, interactive, and marketing strategy and implementation. He's the co-founder of the ICC in Columbus, the International Center for Creativity, and he's a serial entrepreneur who has a heart for the Lord. We're excited to interview him today. It's just going to be me and Mr. Stevenson. Luke is not here with us today, unfortunately, and now there's Scott and Joe, so we're going to just get on and have a lighthearted and fun conversation. So, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Jim actually spoke in one of our entrepreneurship org meetings. Was that a week ago?
Yeah.
And he just kind of told us a little bit about his story and his heart and his expertise. And I was like, this guy's a great fit for the podcast. And so we're excited to have you on. I think we should start with just a little bit about your story.
Sure.
And then we can dive into more like the practices and principles behind ideation, and then some of your advice that you would want to leave with young aspiring entrepreneurs. So give us a little bit about your background, your entrepreneurial journey, and then we'd love to hear about the ICC as well.
Sure. Well, thanks again for letting me share a story. I don't know that it's all that interesting, but I hope whoever's watching this does, or maybe they'll be able to take away something that would inspire them to do it. I didn't grow up in a house with an entrepreneur. As a matter of fact, my dad was a great company man, right? He was very loyal to the companies that he worked for. They came from that greatest generation, and he grew up in that era where there were pensions and companies took great care of their employees, and that's a little bit of what I was expecting, I thought, when I started working, and I found out that era was already starting to dwindle away. And I had a great time. I'm a graduate of the Ohio State University, and I had a great time there because one of the things they instill in you is how to fend for yourself. One of the great parts about Cedarville University are all the resources that you have available, and there's kind, caring people that will walk alongside you and help you figure it out. My experience at Ohio State was very, very different from that. And most large state schools are that way, where you just have to figure it out on your own. And there isn't a hug waiting for you there. It's very much here's the deep end of the pool, good luck. And I think that was good for me in some ways because I was the youngest of three, and I had a fantastic childhood. Everything, I just had a really blessed upbringing in a Christian family, in a Christian home, and it was good for me to go get a dose of reality in this world where I got to go to school and make some great friends. Met my wife there, soaked up every experience that I could soak up, and it gave me this picture of a big world. There was a lot to accomplish, a lot to do.
Yeah.
And that started kind of my curiosity of the world's got to be bigger than Columbus, Ohio. It's got to be bigger than this campus. And I really got that itch to get as many experiences as I could. I wasn't into the whole, I'm going to settle down and find my little niche and work until I retire. I really felt like it was an adventure.
Yeah.
It was a story yet to be written.
Yeah. So you went to Ohio State. You kind of got a dose of reality.
Yeah.
What started your tendency to lean into entrepreneurship from there?
Yeah, it didn't happen until I was, well into my career, almost 10 years into my career, that I started just getting this itch that at one agency where I worked, an ad agency, it was a wonderful ad agency. I learned a ton, but I was one of the younger guys, and I was managing a relatively large body of work. And I was very close to the president of the company, and he was very kind to mentor me. And Bob would tolerate me sitting in his office asking him questions. I'm like, how do I end up in your seat? That's what I wanted to know. How do I run a place like this? And he said, well, you got a lot of people ahead of you. And that message came across very much you're doing great, but that doesn't matter because there's all this other seniority in front of you. And I thought, that's not for me. That didn't feel good. And at that time, I had an opportunity to pursue a passion project. At the agency, I was managing a NASCAR account, the brand activation for Square D and a couple of other brands that were competing in the NASCAR series. And I love motorsports. I love cars, anything with an engine. So it was this really cool mashup, right, of being able to practice my vocation with an avocation. So I was, going to a ton of races, learning from these huge brands, and it felt adventurous. It didn't feel as much like just show up and go to work. But I wasn't really in love with NASCAR. I like cars that turned left and right. I loved open wheel racing, primarily Formula One, IndyCar, and we had a couple of teams that were based in Columbus at the time. And I just thought, I'm going to send it. I'm just going to start hitting these guys with letters and say, hey, here's what I do. I'm a marketing and brand activation guy. I understand events. Do you have room on your team for a guy like me? And as God would provide, there was a guy in my role leaving an IndyCar team that was right in my backyard practically, Tasman Motorsports Group. Wow. And I got to slot in and travel with the team and work with some fantastic brands. Got to work with Quaker State and Honda and MTV and Gatorade and meet the brand managers and find out what their pain points were the kind of things that kept them up at night and elevate to global thinking because these were global platforms. Wow. And that was really inspiring. But that's really when it happened because our owner of the team, who was very entrepreneurial, it shared that he was getting out and he was going to sell the business. Wow. And the acquiring team was starting to ask those questions like, well, who's this person and what do they do and how much do they make? And he was such a stand-up guy. He came and he said, look, I just have to let you know, I think this is going to end up in potential layoffs or you're going to have to move to where this other team was. So my good buddy in the marketing department and I looked at each other and we're like, I think it's time.
That's awesome.
So I talked to the boss, and I remember the moment because I went in and I said, his name is Steve, and I said, Steve, do you think that if like we could provide an in-house marketing services? And he goes, well, it's kind of a conflict of interest if you still work here, And I went back to my desk and I wrote my resignation letter, and I said, well, I don't work here anymore. Wow. And he looked at me and he was that a boy, he kind of gave me that. Yeah, fantastic. So that gave us the freedom to approach our whole sponsor base, right? So we were able to go out to the sponsor base and say, hey, we've worked with you on the racetrack, but now we can work with you on all of your marketing and all your brand activation. And that launched us. So Tom, when I say us, it was Tom Balliott, who's still the co-founder of the ICC, and we're still business partners to this day. Amazing. But I still remember that moment. He said, you can't really do it while you work here, so I quit. And it was just clear to us that was the time. That was the time.
And I remember in one of our conversations when you spoke to the org, you had mentioned that you thought maybe you could have even left the agency sooner and started off on your own, and you kind of maybe wish you did. Could you explain that a little bit?
I did. I think sometimes we get hung up in our own heads of the perception of what was holding me back was that perception of job security. Yeah. And that's an illusion, right?
Right.
I think jobs are riskier than doing your own thing because you end up, your employment is subject to somebody else's spreadsheet, and they may not mean any harm, but they're just managing the business and they're tasked with having to reduce workforce, and they're looking at a spreadsheet going, yeah, we got to get rid of 10 people or whatever it is. Yeah. And you get caught up in those kind of things without ever having to make a case of what your contribution is or anything. And I thought that felt riskier to me than ever starting my own company, was realizing there's people a couple of floors above the floor I'm working on that are having meetings I'm not attending and deciding my future. Yeah. And so that was a switch in my brain that the cost of staying was riskier than the cost of leaving. And
Yeah.
and again, to your point, and that I mentioned before, probably should have done it sooner, because once you take that step, you're like, oh, that wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be, or it's not nearly as scary as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, that's super interesting. There's a lot of different advice about there on when you should start. You have some people saying you should start in college. You have some people saying you should start after you have kids. Some people say you need to start when you're 25, 26, 27, or some say wait till you
Yeah.
build some of your own capital so you can invest in your company. Now, what would you say is the number one determining factor on when it's time to start off on your own?
It's a complicated question. It's like asking, when should I fall in love? I don't know. I have no idea, right? I think individuals make individual decisions, and there's, I think there's right ways, and I think there's wrong ways. But I can't speak. I can only speak to my own personal
Yeah.
experience.
Is there like a heart posture behind it?
Yeah, I've realized now, looking back on it, that I a positive motivation is better than a negative motivation. I think when I hear people say, I don't want somebody telling me what to do, or I want to be in control,
Yeah.
or all this kind of, I think those are fictitious drivers, because you're still not really in control. None of us are, right? We're doing our best to follow God's will in our life, and honor Him with what we do. And you could do that in a lot of places in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes He has very specific things He wants you to do, and sometimes He gives you some latitude, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's the motivator is
Okay.
important. If you have positive motivators of saying, I think I'm a creative image bearer, I believe I have something to contribute, I think I can solve problems for people, I like the idea of being creative. Those kind of motivators to me are the right ones. If you're feeling those, I think it's going to end in something very satisfying. I think if it's just, I don't want the man telling me what to do, you're going to be disappointed, because in
Yeah.
the end of the day, you still have clients, you have customers, you have people that you still are accountable to. So you can't run away from accountability. You have to embrace accountability and say, I want that.
Right.
I think creativity is imagination with accountability,
Okay.
right? That you're using your creative skills. We've seen what it looks like without accountability, right? There's a lot of really creative people that are hedonistic, that are
Yeah.
going to the least common denominator, that are not living God-honoring lives,
Right.
right? And I think that accountability is what really separates a believer that's using their creativity and saying, I embrace the accountability, and I want to use whatever talents God has given me
Yeah.
to make a positive contribution to my community, my family, my church, my business partners, my investors. It isn't what can I get out of it. That's a byproduct,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Of doing all those other things correctly.
So what you're saying is it's not necessarily an age
No.
or not even necessarily experience, although experience could be helpful, but rather one of the main factors in checking yourself before becoming an entrepreneur is your heart posture
Yes, it is. 100%.
and how could you explain a little bit more the Christian principles behind entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I won't pretend to be an expert on this. I can only say in my journey, what I've found is a lot of it's counterintuitive. Did you play any golf?
No,
Okay, so
unfortunately, I do not.
well, Mark Twain called golf a nice walk ruined. So you might be good for not
I
taking
play
it
some
up.
mini golf.
But okay, that's fair. A lot of golf is counterintuitive. If you want the ball to go up, you have to hit down on it. If you want the ball to stay down, you have to hit up on it. If you want it to go right, you move your left foot. If you want it to go left, you move your right foot. You have to trust physics
Right.
at some point, right?
Yeah.
And I think that ends up being the mistake that a lot of people make about entrepreneurship or creativity or those things. It's actually should be done from a humble standpoint.
Mm.
You're there to serve others.
Wow.
This can't be a, what can I get out of it? It needs to be, what can I contribute? Which makes it no different than any other ministry.
Right.
Right. So there's nothing magic about saying, well, I want to go start my own business. To me, that's the first statement that people make. But I think the reframe of it is, how can I use my talents and my gifts and my contributions to make other people's lives better, including my own families, right? You know,
Right.
I work to support my family and to support my business partner's family.
Yeah.
I love that accountability of knowing that he has a family and the decisions that I make can impact his family. And I really embrace that part of it. So there's 3 characteristics that I've over the years discovered in really truly creative people. And one is that they are humble. They are humble. You meet a great musician and you're like, wow, you know, dude, you blow my mind. And they're like, heartfelt. You can say, I really appreciate you giving me positive feedback on my
Yeah.
craft. So humility. The second one to me is having a high tolerance for ambiguity. And that's
Interesting.
faith, right? That's what faith is. When you can act on faith and not sight. When you are trusting of saying, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense, but I'm going to do it because it's the right thing to do. When you step out on faith, that is having a high tolerance for ambiguity. The last one is having this insatiable curiosity to understand how things work, right?
Yeah.
I've seen most of the people that I've met that I really have a lot of respect for have those characteristics. They're humble, they have a high tolerance for ambiguity, and they have this insatiable desire to want to understand how things work. And that, I think, is the viewpoint that I have to struggle with in my own life all the time, of saying, am I doing this out of humility? Am I tolerating ambiguity? Am I curious? You know, and am I
Right.
engaged?
Right. That's awesome. You've been talking about creativity quite a bit. You co-founded the International Center for Creativity. Can
Yeah.
you talk to me a little bit more about creativity, maybe the creative process, and how that's and maybe why you created the ICC to demonstrate that?
Yeah. Thanks for letting me talk about it, because it's something that every day it changes and evolves. And we sold our first company. We exited our first company. Tom and I did, and it was a great exit. And you have all these fantasies about, oh, I'm going to write a book. I'll travel the world. I'll do all this. And my wife's like, oh yeah, or you could like work, you know. And I'm like, yeah, it's a good idea. Let's do that. So we started. Tom and I started meeting on Fridays, and we had these things called Crazy Fridays. And we had an additional business partner that we pulled into this, who was an industrial designer as well. Very creative guy, former General Motors employee. And he was quite a bit older than we are, but he had some good sage ideas. And we sat around and pitched each other ideas. And we came up with some dreadful ideas. I mean, horrible ideas. But we were objective enough to shoot each other down, laughingly and respectfully. But we all arrived at this idea that our client base kept telling us, you guys are really good at training, at inspiring people and extolling knowledge. And they kept saying, you should start a school. You should start a school. And we were like, we had no interest in that. We were not interested in higher ed. We weren't interested in lower ed. We weren't interested in middle ed. We just weren't interested in, we were doing professional development.
Right.
But we didn't get it. I was doing a lot of the marketing and branding with Tom, and our third partner was doing sketching and drawing and some of those types of things. But we couldn't ignore it. It just kept popping up and popping up. And then I had a meeting with Dr. Dan Estes from Cedarville, from the
Wow.
Biblical Studies Department. And I have so much respect for Dan. He's a good friend, and I consider him a mentor, somebody I could go to and just get trusted counsel. And just a great guy.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people on Cedarville's campus know how good of a musician he is. He's a wonderful singer as
Really?
well.
Wow.
And we were in a group together because I'm into music and my wife's into music and his wife's into music. So we had a quartet that was going to perform at a Christmas Eve service.
That's cool.
And there we were after rehearsing at our house. We're sitting in our kitchen. And I was poking him a little bit, going, hey, what's going on over in the cornfields? What's going on over at Cedarville? And he said, well, we're looking for new creative majors, new ways to grow. And I said, you guys need industrial design. We keep hearing from our clients that they need better designers. And he says, oh, is that something you guys are doing? I'm like, well, not really. I mean, we're already a firm. ICC is already a company. We're already doing consulting. But then it hit me. I still remember the time we were driving back from a client's office. And I said, wait a minute. In our research, we have not found one evangelical Christian university in the world that teaches industrial design. How is that possible?
Yeah. Wow.
And I'm a bit of a student of Thomas Edison, and he talked about wanting value monopolies.
Yes.
Be the biggest fish you can be in the smallest pond you can find, right? So we looked at it and said, well, wait a minute. If we created this thing, we'd be the only Christian school in the world that would be teaching industrial design. And we all looked at each other and said, there is no way Cedarville is going to let a bunch of professionals come in and create a program. There's no way. But Dr. Estes said, why don't you talk to this person and this person? And he encouraged us to reach out to the university. And something sparked because I got a bunch of no's.
Interesting.
And don't ever take no from somebody that's not authorized to say yes. Right? And that inspired me of these people because I'm like, they don't get it. We're bringing them something that I think is of high value. And we just kept plodding along. And all of a sudden we got an audience. And this professor, Dr. Steve Winteregg, and he was the chair of art, design, and theater at the time, and Professor Terry Chamberlain, who was a professor in the studio art program, really built the studio art program. Some of his artwork hangs in BTS, actually.
Wow.
Wonderful artist. And we explained what we were thinking. We were like, the industry needs reinvented. The degree needs reinvented. And there are no Christian schools that teach it. Could we partner? And lo and behold, we had no idea of what God had in store for us because we went through this long process of accreditation and working through all the procedural and protocol things that you have to do.
Right.
And lo and behold, there we were. We were
cool.
accepting our first students in, and here we are now. We're the 5th ranked industrial design program in the world, and not for Christian schools, big schools, small schools, but period, and we have, almost 240 graduates out in the marketplace, and God's just blessed it beyond the napkin that we wrote it out on, right? And if someone would have asked me, where are you going to be at this stage in your career? There is no way I would have said, I'm going to be a co-owner, co-founder of a design firm that teaches a college degree.
That's so cool.
Would have never thought of that in a million years.
That's so cool.
Having a high tolerance for ambiguity is important.
It reminds me of having like a growth mindset.
Yes.
Just like being open to continuing to grow and experience change, and to not put yourself in a box in a way.
I couldn't agree more. And to me, there's Stephen Covey, who's an author and consultant from back in the 90s, always talked about you can have a scarcity mentality or an abundance mentality. And the scarcity mentality is I'm going to hold things to myself, and I'm thinking that this is the last deal I'm ever going to get, so I have to protect it. And the abundance mentality is that there's plenty to go around, right? And if you have that abundance mentality, you're open to possibilities.
Of course.
I think that helped.
Yeah, I wanna go back real quick because, in my courses, which part of them are at the ICC, we talk about ideation, we talk about creativity.
Right.
You mentioned something called Crazy Fridays.
Right.
Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so Crazy Fridays was just a concept for us of getting together and being intentional about developing an idea. And there were no rules, right? So as you learned in the design thinking process, that first stage of discovery, the divergent thinking process, is that there aren't really rules. What you're trying to find is possibility thinking, and that's the role of creativity, is to find iterations and alternatives. How many alternatives can I come up with? Before you start making decisions and converging on being more specific with your problem or your challenge. So Crazy Fridays were a divergent thinking exercise that we were very intentional about, where instead of saying, oh, we have 45 minutes, let's get together and have a meeting, we sat around all morning, and I'm talking 9 to noon,
Wow.
slogging through concepts. And we would do one-pagers, right? What's the problem? What problem are you trying to identify? Who's the potential audience? And we have a rule that we always have to answer, and there's 2 questions: so what and who cares, right? So you have to answer the so what, meaning what's my unique value? What's special about me? And in your next course, you're going to run into the business model canvas
Right.
again, and it's obviously the value proposition. We're going to go deep in that. That's the so what, and the who cares is your customer segment. And are there enough customers to care about your value proposition? So that's what these Crazy Fridays were about on these one-pagers. And we would riff off of these things, like they would morph a little bit. And I don't know how many dozen we went through, but there were some really dreadful ones. And when you give yourself permission to have bad ideas, you eventually or occasionally can come up with a good one. You know?
So you have to kind of be confident in yourself, and being, it's okay to have bad ideas, because once you allow yourself to be humble in that process,
Yeah.
you can have bad ideas, but you can also, spark some really creative idea. And I'm curious, we kind of did this in the class kind of on our own. Do you recommend doing like this divergent thinking with a group of people? And in your context, were you trying specifically to find a business you guys could all go in on, or were you just trying to come up with businesses for other people? How did...
That's a good question. No, we were looking at it as a potential collaboration. We were
Okay.
practicing the first who and then what. And I'm a bit of a collaborator. I think Tom could work independently or collaboratively, but I'm not a good independent operator. I really need other people to bounce ideas off of, and I feed off of other people's ideas, and I like to elevate other people's ideas. So I'm more of a collaborator.
Okay.
But that's not everybody's personality. I think some people are really good independent operators, where they can get in and focus, and they have a lot of skills, and those skills apply to a lot of different things. But you had mentioned something earlier. Objectivity is really important. You need to be able to realize that your idea might be awful. Not every idea is a good idea,
Even if you're passionate about it.
especially if you're passionate about it, right? And I always call it, you're lost, but you're making good time, right? That's the big error that we see. Because at the ICC, we still have a lot of entrepreneurs that approach us saying, hey, I have this idea. We're like, great, come on in. And we get our machine guns out, and we start the process of the so what, who cares?
Right.
And the inflexibility of some entrepreneurs is their demise, because they're not willing to say, I'm the target audience. I really care a lot about this, but I'm not willing to go out and find out if this is something that's passionate enough to invest in and see if other people want to solve it. The number one reason ventures fail is there was no market.
Yeah.
It's not some big complicated thing. You give other people what they want, and in order to get what you want, which is a living.
Yeah.
Right? So satisfying other people's pain points and needs is the number one thing. And that's the fallout of a lot of entrepreneurs is you consider yourself the audience, and you're not.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about on this show the importance of market research, of understanding what your audience really wants. And it goes back to the point that passion is not the most important thing in
No.
entrepreneurship. And I think it's kind of portrayed like that by some people. It's like, I have a passion about this and I want this to succeed. I'm going to make it happen. But
Right.
really, I mean, it goes, you mentioned when you were speaking to us that the passion should be more in the process, right?
Yes.
The passion's in the process. What matters is, are you actually serving people and providing value, and if they actually care?
Right. For a period of time that they care about it,
Right.
which can change. I admire one of my good friends, Kurt, who's one of our instructors as well, who is completely agnostic when it comes to product. He doesn't care if it's T-shirts, Power Wheels, or coffee mugs. Whatever people are looking for, he'll figure out a way to supply it. He's going totally from the other side of it, that what he's passionate about is finding these niches for the period of time that you can ride them out. And that to me just shows the importance of objectivity. Can you look at the idea objectively enough to decide whether it's a problem worth solving? And we've sequenced the Masters of Innovation and the concentration inside the MBA to have that be the first class, is how to identify opportunities for innovation.
Right.
Because not every problem is worth solving or could become a business. And that's tough to pass over some when you go, well, we found something, but it's really not worth that much right now. Maybe it will be later on. And that's tough, because you get really married to it and you get emotionally tied to it. And I think you have to get those emotions under control.
Right.
And realize that it doesn't matter how passionate you are about it. What matters is if the customer can get passionate about it. And that process is important, because then it becomes repeatable, right? It's not just mining for every once in a while you might mine some gold. It's knowing where to look, how to look, better techniques, and being humble enough to continue to refine it. And we run into the mistake of a lot of entrepreneurs, I think, are guilty of the sin of omnicompetence, right? Because you get into the bootstrapping mindset of saying, oh, I can build my own website. Oh, I can do my own social media. Oh, I'll go out and negotiate my own space. You do all that stuff because you kind of have to, for a certain period of time.
Yeah, of course.
But then you go, well, I still have control of it and I don't want to give it up. And now you're holding yourself back, because there's somebody else that's better at that than you are, or than I am. And it's hard giving those things over and saying, yeah, you go ahead and do this, even though I've done that for a period of time. I think knowing those things is also really important, of being objective again. Objectivity, I think, is more, and self-awareness.
Self-awareness
is almost more important, even though you're having to read the book. I love Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. It really does speak to, you have to be willing to grind. But one disservice that we teach our kids is, don't ever give up. I'll tell you, if it's a bad idea, give up. Stop it. Stop doing bad things, right? There are certain things you should quit doing, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to know when to drop it and say, right now I'm tabling this thing because I've proved failure. We're also afraid of failure. We've given it this big capital F for failure, and it's awful. But that's the only thing that ever makes people grow. So to me, it's not the wrong answer. It could be the right answer for a question that hasn't been asked yet, but it's not the right answer for the question you're asking right now. Let's move on.
In the book, I just read one of the quotes was something like, when you say yes to so many things, you're actually saying no to all of them. It was something like that, where you really need to take, I think she said in her book, she had like 32 passion projects or things she was wanting to focus on, and she realized she had to take it down to like 5. Otherwise, she can't give the proper attention to each of them. And so she had to say no to 27 of them, or however many there were, in order to really focus in. And so, I mean, that's in her book about grit. So it's okay to say no, really. It's okay to say no for saying yes to other things.
It's one of the most powerful words in the human language, is no thank you. And we have a tendency to overcommit as servants too, saying, oh, I'll go volunteer here, I'll volunteer there. And then pretty soon you always have to ask yourself, at what cost? What opportunity cost am I giving up? I'm dedicating time, effort, resources, bandwidth. And we make the big mistake of getting quality time and quantity time backwards. We all say, "Oh, well, I'm gonna spend a little quality time with my family." I think that's wrong. I think you should spend quantity time with your family and some quality time at work. Go work
Yes.
those 3 hours intensely,
Yes.
so you have more time to go play with your kids
Yes.
and more time to be with your spouse. And I heard a guy, his name's Brian Dodge. He's a great motivational speaker, and writes books, and he introduced that concept to me and at a conference, not to me personally, but at a conference. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. And one of his little tricks that he did is, when he was an office-based worker, but he did it at his home office as well. He just took a sheet of notebook paper and he wrote, like on a Friday afternoon or a Thursday afternoon when he was leaving, he wrote down all the things that he needed to start with the next morning and left it on his keyboard and walked away. And it allowed his mind to detach
Yeah.
and say, I don't have to keep those projects active in my head. I can detach and just leave it there and go home and be wholly there. And I can be in that moment and then come back and go, oh, here's my to-do list. I'm ready to go. That was a really effective, simple mindset. And some days I'm successful at it and other days I'm not. But I notice the days that I have that list waiting for me when I show up, I'm so much more productive that first half an hour.
Yeah. It sounds like a challenge from what I've heard from other entrepreneurs, is that, they feel like they can't turn their mind off. They're always wanting to keep working on their project. And I really think part of Christian stewardship is, if you have a family, is to be able to steward that time with your family well and invest in them.
Absolutely.
Could you expand a little bit more upon what it means to be a Christian steward, both of your time and your business?
Yeah, and I won't pretend like I get it right all the time either. This is a work still in progress here, so I'm not. It's a little uncomfortable to act like I'm an expert, because
Okay.
I'm not. I'm a work in progress. To me, there are way too many people at the beach thinking about the office. Way too many people at the office thinking about the beach, and the real challenge, I think, is to succumb to the fact that if you worked 24 hours a day, you would still not get it done.
Yeah.
Right. So if you set some milestones and say, here's something I'd like to get accomplished this year or by summer. And I'm not a huge fan of goal setting when it becomes disappointing, right? You set all these goals and then you accomplish 3 of them and you feel like it was a failure.
Yeah.
I don't mind setting low bars. I love writing something down knowing that I'm going to have the satisfaction of crossing it off, right? And that incremental progress helps keep you in the moment. And I think I actually feel for your generation, because you have so many more distractions that come with you. Mobile technology was pitched to my generation as, oh, you can work from anywhere. You're not going to be tied to your desk. You're going to have more free time. I'm like, we've had less free time now than we've ever had, because it's following you around.
Yeah.
So you have to be very intentional about it. I'm not great at it, but I pick my times. When my family starts going to bed, I'm a nighttime creative.
Okay.
10 o'clock on is my gig. I love that time. That's my creative thinking time. And my wife's usually kind of fading out on the couch, or HGTV is getting into repeats or whatever she's watching, right? And that's that time for me. I love dumping my inbox, writing down some ideas, because my head's spinning. And I've heard so many people say, oh, you got to get up really early. I think if you want to be super productive, go ahead and get up early. But if you want to be super creative, stay up late. Now, that may be horrible advice. Some people may be looking at this and going, I can't believe you just said that. But I think there's this misnomer that somehow those kind of habits, all those are outward appearances of busyness.
Yeah.
I'm up at 5 every day. Congratulations. What do you want? A sticker? I'd rather see
So
what's
true.
the fruit. What's the fruit? What did you get done?
True.
If you need a nap by 10 o'clock, what was the point? So I think that stuff's very personal on how you work. But again, it's that self-awareness.
So you really just have to figure out what works best for for you and the way that God created you and the way
Yeah.
that you're most productive.
My Tom and I, when we started our first company, we had little kids, right? And they were up during the afternoon. Like they took their naps and then they were up. So we would go in early and work until about lunch. We'd hit some lunch, dump our inboxes, return some calls, then we go home. And then we would reconvene that night at about 10 o'clock and work till 2 in the morning,
Wow.
right? Because they were all sleeping. So we had that opportunity to say, hey, let's go be with our families while they're awake.
Yeah.
And then we would hit a project and I'd go over to his house or he'd come over to mine, or eventually we had an office together. And that's just worked for us because of the stage of life we were in at the time. And that's the other thing that changes when you become an entrepreneur. You have more opportunities to work throughout the day. You just have to be intentional about taking time to shut down. Again, I've referenced Covey before. He has the 7 habits of highly effective people. One of them is you have to stop and sharpen your saw every once in a while. What's the thing that rejuvenates you? And for me, it's going to car shows or tinkering with my car. I love doing mechanical work on my car. It's music. I like to play music. I like to go to concerts. And I love to hike. I love to be outdoors. So those things put gas back in my engine.
Yeah.
And if you don't do those things, you'll run out of gas and then you'll just be sitting there gasping for air and you come to a complete stop along the highway. And that's not good either. So
Right.
I think you have to just be intentional about setting appointments for yourself.
That's very cool. Now, more of an overarching question. So we talked about, creativity. We talked about, understanding yourself, having a self-awareness,
Yeah.
having that humility. Kind of all together, what would you say is like the overarching role of a Christian entrepreneur?
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question. I think the overarching rule is to be a creative image bearer. I think God could have chosen a lot of ways to introduce himself, and he chose to introduce himself as creative. And we don't talk about creativity nearly enough in church. And I don't get it. It's Genesis 1:1,
Yeah.
right? He could have chosen a lot of ways to introduce himself. But I also think we don't talk about the Holy Spirit enough in evangelical circles. I grew up going to a Methodist church, and they always talked about, at the time, 3 in 1. It was always Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. They've never really mentioned one without the other. And then we started going to an evangelical free church when I was a kid, and I'm like, where did the Holy Ghost go? He vanished, right? We just didn't talk about the Holy Spirit.
Wow.
And to me, the Holy Spirit is our secret weapon, right? It's what hovered over the face of the deep and pulled form out of void and was present the day of creation. So I hear Christians say that they're not creative. I go, whoa, hang on a second. The Spirit that was present and during the day of the week of creation, doing this work, dwells in us.
Right.
It's just the still small voice that we drown out with other stuff. So I think a Christian entrepreneur has to be God's creative image bearer in how they do deals, how they treat their employees, how they provide for the family, their reputation in the marketplace, the kind of work that they're doing. And it can be a service, it could be, any of those things. It doesn't really matter. It's how you approach it that gives you the opportunity to tell your story and to talk about what drives you. And if you're not really good at what you do, you miss that opportunity. So
Interesting.
excellence is a great testimony.
Yeah.
Very rarely do people go and ask the advice from people that aren't good at what they do. You can't be a slacker at your work and then expect to be able to have someone come to you and say, there's something different about you and I want to know what it is.
Yeah.
It ain't going to happen, right? They're going to
Right.
look at it and go, person's not a very good employee, or this person's not a very good boss, or whatever it is. So I think that's how we honor where we are. And I think that is the overarching role of a Christian entrepreneur, is to be a creative image bearer. And some people are more overt with it than others. We're not terribly overt with it because it's painfully obvious when you get to know us.
Right.
Right. And I think we're Christians who are entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and I think there are entrepreneurs who are Christians. And for us, I think it just becomes a way of life, a way of doing business, and how you treat each other and how you treat your employees and how you do deals.
Yeah.
Because every day is a decision.
True.
Every day is a decision on how you're going to handle something. You know?
That's awesome. As we wrap up, what would be the number one piece of entrepreneurial advice you've ever been given?
Mm.
And what is something you'd want to leave with our audience today?
Okay, so the number one question is actually, this is kind of easy for me because Steve, who inspired our company, we approached him about being an investor. I said, would you want to be an investor in our startup? And he shook his head and he goes, it's not that I don't think you're investment worthy. You just don't need them. He goes, get customers over investors. Right? And at some point, if you need to scale, I understand that, right? If you need marketing and distribution, or if you need to scale to factory or whatever it is, you might need an investor round or something to elevate. But as a startup, just sell one. Go get customers because you'll learn so much from them. You get feedback and cash flow, and they don't expect to get it back. Whereas an investor wants their money back.
Right.
No matter how philanthropic or interested they are, at the end of the day, they're an investor because they want to make money off of their money. So he told us, he said, customers over investors, and focus on more customers because cash flow solves a lot of problems when you're a business owner,
Yeah.
when you have that cash flow. So I think that was probably the best piece of advice we got when we were starting up, was just focus on acquiring customers. And we did. We pedaled our bike really hard and ended up with more work than we could handle, which was a good problem to have,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
But that would have gone differently, I think, if we would have gone that traditional path of raising money and those sorts of things. I just love that we launched our company on sales.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to leave with our audience today?
No, except there's never a good time. You always say, well, I'm not sure this is the right time. I'm not sure this is the right time. There's never a good time. There's never a good time to take a vacation, but you still should do it. There's never a good time to take time off. Still do it anyway. You'll figure it out. You'll work around it. And the same way with taking the leap to become an entrepreneur, there's never a good time because you'll always find 10 people to tell you it's an awful idea, none of whom have ever been an entrepreneur, who never did take the jump themselves. So I would say that just be very self-aware and be objective about what it is that you're offering, and that there's never a good time to just lick the stamp and send it.
Well, Mr. Stevenson, thank you today for a great conversation and being on the Kingdom Kommerce podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you all for watching this episode of Kingdom Kommerce. Make sure you give us a like and follow our socials. If you have any questions or inquiries, please reach out at info@kingdomkommerce.media. We'll look forward to seeing you in that next episode.